Teams that you see here that control their own destiny. Chargers, Broncos, and Commanders can all clinch spots in the playoffs with wins in Week 17, and the Eagles can also secure the NFC East crown by beating the Cowboys. But that's going to get a little more difficult, as we're about to explain to you here on NFL Live. I'm Dan Graziano, pleased to be joined by Ryan Clark, Mina Kimes, and Marcus Spears on this huge Friday ahead of Week 7, but I feel like we're already halfway through Week 17. But I want to start in Philadelphia, where it was just announced that quarterback Jalen Hurts, will not play in this week's game against the Cowboys. Hurts left Sunday's game with a concussion, remains in concussion protocol, and that means it'll be Kenny Pickett at quarterback for the Eagles this week. So, Mina, let's get right to it. Without Hurts in this one, what are you expecting? What should the Eagles' game plan be on offense?
Well, you'd like to see them run the ball a lot more effectively than they did last week when Jalen Hurts went out. In the second half last week, 20 carries for just over 2 yards per carry. And what jumped out to me watching them against that Commanders defense, they were playing the run so aggressively without the fear of a quarterback keeper. The linebackers in particular were triggering downhill versus those shotgun runs. So I think this week, spinning forward against Dallas, the challenge for Kellen Moore is you can't lean on having that numbers advantage back there to give linebackers pause. So how else can you create some pause, some hesitation? I would put Saquon under center more for his runs, maybe work some under center play action off of that, get that dominant offensive line working downhill against the Dallas Cowboys defensive line where you have an advantage. The run game has to look different from how it looked last week because Kenny Pickett is going to need that sort of support.
MK, I'm with you. I think, one, creating different, obviously, formations and motions and all of that. But Kenny Pickett has some athleticism, too. Just the threat of him potentially keeping it. Now, I know that he hasn't worked operation with Saquon Barkley all season long on potential zone reads. But if you have it, use it. And I know he has the injury. I know he's a little bit banged up. But the threat of him potentially keeping and being able to get to the corner as well. We saw Jalen legs starting to take effect in that Washington Commanders game early in that game. And I don't think that's something that you need to lose. I think Kenny Pickett is obviously athletic enough to get you 7 or 8 yards on a zone read keeper and give the defense something else to think about. But I'm with you when it comes to that. And then, too, when you get these opportunities, the one-on-ones, make sure you tell Kenny Pickett, trust your guys to win, because he made some throws and should have made some plays in order to win that game. Obviously, the Devontae Smith drop, but I didn't think he was terrible outside of the interception to Louisville where he got fooled and baited. But I would definitely lean into his athleticism on his own read a little bit as well.
The other thing is, I want to know how the Dallas Cowboys are going to play him from a depth perspective in the secondary. Is Deron Bland, is Jordan Lewis, and some of those guys, are they going to be pressing? Are they going to be or try to force Kenny Pickett to make the deep throw? Let's go back to his time in Pittsburgh and the difference between having Mason Rudolph, who would give George Pickens opportunities down the football field, than Kenny Pickett, which eventually made Mason the starting quarterback heading into the playoffs. And so it's going to be some of those plays and taking some of those shots, like the one you saw him take to A.J. Brown on Marshawn Lattimore, which was underthrown, but he was able to catch that 50-50 ball. To Marcus's point about trusting your guys on the outside. And I think this could be a game where we do see more 12 personnel, more 21 personnel, where you put Kenny Pickett under center and allow Saquon Barkley to run the football from a more traditional set in the backfield, especially playing against the Dallas Cowboys, who we watched struggle with that early on in the season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the Eagles are in an interesting spot. They lost to Washington last week, which means they still haven't wrapped up their division. Still a chance that Washington could catch them if they don't win one of their last couple of games. And they are 1-3 over the last 4 seasons in games that Jalen Hurts doesn't start, 45-17 when he does. So they got their work cut out for them.
We've played a lot of the top defenses in the league and consistently put together good performances against them. So I always have a ton of confidence in our guys, and each defense presents its own challenges, and you take that week by week. So we'll have a good scheme and we'll be ready for it. That's why you work so hard. You want to play in these kinds of games that matter at the end for the postseason. So hopefully we can go out and get a win and put ourselves in a good spot.
So as we mentioned, big playoff implications in this game tomorrow. Pretty simple for Denver. They win either one of their final 2 games and they're in the playoffs. 75% chance of that happening according to ESPN analytics. Much tougher, however, for Cincinnati. The Bengals need to win their final 2 games, and they need the Broncos to lose to the Chiefs in Week 18 when the Chiefs might not be playing anybody. And the Colts and the Dolphins would need to lose, each lose one of their final 2 games. So all that has to happen for Cincinnati to get in. So you're saying there's a chance. RC, when you look at Burrow and Chase, the LSU connection against this Broncos defense, how's that matchup look to you?
You know what? I think it's fun. I believe Riley Moss will be back this week, which is huge for the Denver Broncos. They just weren't as good opposite Patrick Surtain II through the last few weeks without him on the field. But we've seen guys like Jerry Jeudy have a day, Ladd McConkey have a day. I mean, we watched Jameis Winston throw for 1 million yards on Monday Night Football. And then we also saw Justin Herbert go for 284 in that primetime win last Thursday. And so if you are the Denver Broncos, you're trying to figure out a way to stop Jamar Chase, to wonder if T. Higgins will be healthy enough to go. But also Chase Brown out of the backfield has been able to create explosive plays as well. And the one thing I've loved about watching Hard Knocks is seeing how dialed in Joe Burrow is, how much he has his hands on everything that goes on with the Cincinnati Bengals offense. I got an opportunity to practice in joint practices against Tom Brady in my last year in Washington, and it was the exact same thing. He's focused, he's locked in, and if the Denver Broncos don't play their A game, they'll get exploited.
If they do play their A game, specifically, Ryan, if Patrick Surtain limits Jamar Chase, this is, by the way, probably the best single offense versus defense matchup of the entire weekend. I would argue that he has a strong case for Defensive Player of the Year, being the best player on a dominant defense. There's really no one who meets those criteria quite like him. It's going to be important also, particularly when they blitz. Chase is by far the overwhelming target getter when Joe Burrow is blitzed this year, more than any receiver in the NFL, by the way. We know the Broncos defense likes to send pressure. So there's a ton of opportunity here for Surtain to have a signature performance. I do think, though, from Cincinnati's perspective, you hit that. It often becomes about your secondary pass catchers, whether that's a healthy T. Higgins against Riley Moss, or if Riley Moss doesn't go, someone else, in which case you want to target him a lot, or Chase Brown or Mike Gesicki. So often with the Bengals, whether or not they have a dominant offensive performance, comes down to whether or not someone other than Jamar Chase takes advantage of their one-on-one opportunities.
Yep. RC, you mentioned Chase Brown when you were talking, and that's where I want to go, because a lot of times when we look at the Cincinnati Bengals, we see them operate so much with Joe in the shotgun, and you just throwing the ball and tearing people up that way as good as they've been. But this explosive run game that they've been able to create with him now allows the Cincinnati Bengals to dictate looks that they get. That's why the excitement that Mina has with Patrick Surtain matched up with Jamar Chase, you may get a lot of that because the Cincinnati Bengals are able to run the football. It's going to be super interesting as they go down this path and try to make their way in the playoffs, obviously needing some help. I think they understand that this is an element of their offense that at times they're going to need to be dominant. And I think Chase Brown, coming off of last week, it's a ton of confidence coming into the game, almost at 100 yards. It helps Joe Burrow. It helps this offensive line. But more importantly, on the back end, like we were talking about, you can now control and get some of those favorable matchups that you look for, as opposed to having to spread out every single down and everybody knows that it's a passing situation. So I'm looking forward to seeing how much they use him, not only to nullify the blitz, but also, that word just told me up, dog.
Hey, it beat your tail.
Blitz, but also dictate, God, let me drink some water. Go ahead, Ross.
One quick injury note on the Bengals. RC referenced it. T. Higgins, wide receiver T. Higgins, listed as questionable with ankle and knee injuries, but he did practice on a limited basis every day this week. They're hopeful he's able to go. We wanted to pick this game, and we're split.
That may nullify some of the passing game.
T. Higgins would help nullify some of Denver's defensive advantages. That was an excellent point there, Swigoo, and